One of the questions will be about the name of your studio, Studio Mumbai. So how does it relate to the city with the name that you use? Or where does it come from, like Studio Mumbai?
Fairly straightforward. Studio being a place to work, to look at things, and Mumbai is just its physical location. So for me, what's important or not important is that it has then the ability to transform if it is in another place, you know, in another country. Because the entire basis of, for me, what is important, that it's a space where people can come in and go out. You know, so it's not a restrictive environment, but an open environment, where the idea being that we collect together in the possibility of an imagination. And if our resources enable us to do that, that's the space that we can come and collect in.
And you have used the word collective a lot, like collectively with the people and collectively coexisting and collectively. So could you tell me a little more about?
Yeah, for me, this idea first comes personally with my own self. Because I'm a construction of many, not of one. And in the construction of the fact that I am many, I'm already in that, on that basis, a collective. And that in the collective, for me to sustain myself, I have to participate and practice in a possibility that I can coexist with my many. Okay. And so if I say that's my inside, that is, and then I use that as the basis of understanding the outside. So for me, the architecture in many ways is a space where the possibility, for me what's important really is that it's a space where this collective possibility can exist in an agreement or disagreement. But it's a space that fundamentally for me is where a place where it can contain that possibility.
And also you talk about negotiating time, negotiating speed, and it can also connect with this idea of collectivity.
Yes, because if I understand within the many that a part of me, some part of me will have a priority over another part of me, where, and for whatever the reasons might be, because it's based on an environment where, you know, things are in flux, because it's not static. And so the ability to negotiate a system of priori, not so much to slow things down or to speed things up, but to remain attentive to having a dialogue. I know I'm being a bit abstract here, but I want to be a little bit more specific. Is that how do I find, or how do I construct, or how do I create, or how do I make a space that remains neutral?
So that will be the in-between space that you talk about?
That's right. Because I then don't necessarily need to take a specific side or make a predetermined judgment. But a place or a space that can remain attentive and remain neutral to the ebb and flow, or to the going out and coming back in. Right.
So this is when, I wrote it, when the understanding complex relationships through the power of observation comes, when it's very acute or attentive, the idea of how you observe things.
But observation measured from what? Right, so, because yes, observation is the action, right? But the idea of observation in that action, right, in acting, right, comes from being attentive, right, to an environment, because there's an unfolding of space occurring at that point in time, and so it allows.
So I also believe that representation of reality,
yes,
transforms it, right? So this will be also the idea of, how you say, observation in action. Like when you represent with your mock-ups, your models, your drawings, your sketches, then you start transforming reality, right? And then you transform it into architecture.
Right, but at some point it still is a mythical space, just in the way that you and me are mythical space, because we were conceived before we were in before we even came to physicality. Because just in the idea that we existed as an idea, as an imagination, that itself was the beginning of our construction. Right?
So Juhani Palashma, yesterday, were you in his
yes.
conference?
Yes.
He talked about space, place, and atmosphere.
Right.
And he talked about the haptic and not only the optic, and like the multi-sensory perception. And you also talk about how to use your 5 senses, not only one sense. And I perceive it in your architecture, even if I don't know it physically, but with photographs and what I have studied, I can feel that those spaces have an atmosphere, have an ambience, have all these qualities of space. Can you talk a little more about it?
For me, what is critical is to create a space or a place that can enable the possibility of the 5 senses to coexist in a system of priori that is not based on a predetermined movement of time, or that is not based on a prejudice. But I also have to, in that space, include those ideas. So I have to be neutral in agreement and disagreement. It just depends on your haptic and optic space in a way, right? And at what point you are in time and place to participate, to receive, to absorb, or the reverse, right? I've experienced many times in a month, in a week, in a day, where my space can be completely open and receptive. And all it takes is a few seconds to completely close that down. I'm calling that no different from the sea. There's an ebb and a flow. If we understand ourselves as an extension of water, and that the gravitational pull has a direct impact on our haptic and optic space, right? So there must be a place that can allow for that kind of movement. Then it doesn't matter really what they feel or they don't feel.
About collecting things, you also talk about your archive and how you you talk about the IMS and how the reference about collecting things. And I can see that your studio is a laboratory or a collection of all these materials, and how you put them together, how you stack them, how you turn them, and they become another thing.
Right.
How you play with all these things, all the materials.
I think for me, there's some way to make physical, or they're actions of an imagination. And that's all that they're really there for, is that then I can live with these things and they can live with me. More, I think for me importantly, as a way to understand me as a point of reference in a much larger, more complex, you want to call it universe, environment, city, whatever it is. It's how do I use myself as a system of measure, as a tool, in a way that I begin to understand the space that I inhabit. It's not to collect them so that they can be collected. It's to collect them so that there's a possibility of an experience through which it gives me a better insight of my relationship in these surroundings. And then it enables me or allows me the possibility of how is it then I would like to participate and what is it that I can do with these things.
And how about the change of scale with the building that you showed?
The scale is the same because the point of reference is our physical occupations. So for me, it's not about size. And I think that's where we make oftentimes, and it's a problem of language, where I think, how do you negotiate size as opposed to how do you negotiate scale? Because scale can still be negotiated in whatever the size might be, right? Yeah, and so what is it that you remain attentive to? And it's the back and forth, it's the to and fro, it's the ability to make transparent this ebb and flow. And so the entire position of the tower for me is how do we occupy a space that is flat and what might appear to be thin.
And also with this idea of in-between space again.
Right. So that's exactly where, in a sense, the passing of the day is measured by the occupants that remain transparent, opaque, translucent.
Or how they are active in that space.
Right. So that's what I'm saying, the back and forth is inevitable.
So it would be like the city is in that space, or the space is in the city. Again, it's the whole.
Right, right. But it's also a way for me, more importantly, where the participation, it's a threshold, it's the ability to provide a tolerance to what is outside and what is inside. I think that's important, is to provide a space that has tolerance, that has some give. Otherwise, what could be very flat and sharp. And
so you change the notion of inside and outside.
Yeah. Because inside can be outside and outside can be inside in the conversations that we're having.
And again, we come back to the idea of collective, right?
Yeah, I think that it's difficult for us to, because then what we do is we polarize. Do you know what I mean? We all have that. And so I think it's sometimes misunderstood when I say collective. I'm talking about a collective of what? It's a collection of possibilities, of love, of anger, hate. We all have these emotions. Not a single one of us is free of that. A certain, I don't want to use the word sensitivity, but a tenderness, a sort of a care. We all have these multiple qualities within us. Right? So that means we're made up of a collective. We're a collection of things that gives us individuality, that gives us diversity, that gives us character. Right? It's trying to find how to keep a balance, or to find a place that you can go back into balance, because you will move, we will resonate.
I believe that I perceive it in your spaces, whether you're talking about this idea, this whole idea. So this idea of yourself, and then how you transmit it into your architecture, because it's the same, it's part of.
I mean, you have a legend here, master here in Mexico City, and who I've not studied, but I have taken great, the word is reveled in the work. More from what draws me is that there's a space for all these possibilities to exist. If you just take his own house, where his interest is not so much to keep out, but to let in, and still remain open to his own private space. Do you know what I mean? There's space for all possibilities, and they can be so subtly nuanced.
So then this is the idea when past, present and future coexist.
Yes.
Everything is there.
Yes, the idea is that, because that's the only way we displace time.
So we were talking before about your perception of Mexico City. Can you just again repeat a little about that? So.
For me, it's been an incredible experience. There are great similarities for me in the city, and at the same time, not. But I don't think that's important. For me, the part that I've enjoyed most is this overlay of time. You know, and for me, they all still exist. You know, it's, I believe, our myopic view, right? That all this has gone by, but I still think that everything is still very much present. You know, from the pyramids to the Aztecs to what exists today and what possibly is going to come tomorrow. But for me, really, here it's a negotiation of, and I said that in the lecture, is this really beautiful relationship, which I believe is what we're really part of, is the relationship of the sun and the moon, you know, and we're the third, and that's how we make the triangle. And then adjacent to that is the Greenwich Mean Time, which is based on a system of economy, which is really based on one thing, and that's on economy. I don't have a problem with that. You know, I think as long as we maintain this dialogue, right? And that's what I see here in Mexico City. I see, you know, I can see it, I can feel it. You know, I think there's great abundance
of chaos.
I think chaos is an instrument to subterfuge time. You require that.
Sure we do.
And I don't mean time in the way that time in our lack or in our inability, because our measure of time is based on the time that we're born and to the time we die. That's, you know, our inability to have that depth of field. Because the moment we perceive ourselves into that kind of deep space, there's a sort of sense of an abyss, you know, for negotiation of this sort of vast space. But we all potentially have that because we fundamentally are that, right? But that's why we're human. And quite frankly, to be very honest with you, this idea pretty much exists everywhere, maybe in different degrees, maybe in differing priorities, but it's everywhere. Here there's a vibrancy, and for me, I don't think anything is lost. It's a folly to say that we're lost. Then we, in my view, you know, imagination doesn't exist. And if you look outside.
And how do you feel about contemporary architecture and this idea of the image and how it looks and know of how it feels?
I don't.
Do you teach?
I do.
And what is the first thing that you
For me, I'm not interested in
students?
spectacle. I think what you're talking about is spectacle. Right? When you talk about image. I don't have a problem with image. Neither do I have a problem with spectacle. But if it's only that, you know, for me, I think what's important is that there's more to it than just spectacle. Spectacle is one of the many, not the only one.
And what do you say to your students? Like, what would be like?
I think when I'm teaching, for me, what's important is to use themselves as a point of reference in space, as a system of measure. Because at that point, you participate from all the facets that are within us. That's the happening optic space.
The multisensory experience.